But what about the person who's never heard the gospel? We hear that, right? Is God going to send them to hell? Listen to this. God will judge us according to the light we have received. God's not going to hold you accountable for what you don't know. Having said that, people know a lot more than maybe they let on. Because the scripture tells us that when God created us, he put eternity in our hearts. That's found in Ecclesiastes 3:11. That means that God built inside of you and inside of me a sense that life should have meaning and purpose. And that's why we've been on a search from the earliest days of our life. That's why we've thought about the meaning of our life. Going back to our childhood, I don't think animals do that. Do you? Do you think your dog lays around and thinks, what's the meaning of my life? It just seems like that would be the voice of a dog. Or actually, it's the voice of, you ever watch that Davy and Goliath? That's Goliath, the dog. He says, oh, Davy. So you think a dog sits around and thinks, you know, I've tried all that this world has to offer. I've chased cats. I drank toilet water. I even ate roadkill, but there's still a void in my life. I don't think dogs think those thoughts. I know cats don't. But people do, don't they? God built us that way. We're pre-wired for eternity. Listen to this. Romans 1:18-20 says this. God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people, listen, who push the truth away from themselves, for the truth about God is known to them instinctively because God put this knowledge in their hearts from the time the world was created. People have seen the earth and the sky and all that God made. They can see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse whatsoever for not knowing God. So there is, in a sense, built in us, a sense of what right and wrong are. Maybe it's not fully thought out, but there is that sense. There is a conscience. There is a sense of guilt that's built into us by God himself. Some will say, well, I live by my own standards. See, the absurdity is people don't even live by their own standards. Even if they lowered the bar down to their kneecap, they don't even live by those standards. They break all of those standards and they break what they know is true. Some will say, well, I'm a seeker of God. I believe if a person is a true seeker of God, they will find their way to Jesus Christ. Because God says in his word, in Jeremiah 29:13, if you seek me with all of your heart, I will be found by you. Here's a great illustration. There's a Roman centurion. His name was Cornelius. But he was a religious man. He was impressed by the faith of the Jews. And he was asking God to reveal himself to him. And the Lord directed him to Peter, the apostle, to preach the gospel to him. And when Cornelius heard the gospel from Peter, he and his family all believed. Okay, that's because he was a true seeker. But here's the reality. The reason people bring this up is they're using it as a smokescreen. So here's something I like to say. I answer the question, what about the person who's never heard the gospel? And then I like to bring it to this. But listen, you are hearing the gospel right now because I'm sharing the gospel with you. And I'm going to tell you what the gospel is. And that's what I'm going to talk about on Sunday morning. I'm going to define the gospel. You might be surprised by what you hear. Because I would suggest to you that sometimes in the so-called presentation of the gospel, it ain't the gospel. And we need to know what the gospel actually is. But I'll say you are hearing the gospel and God's going to hold you accountable. So don't worry about the person who's never heard it. Think about yourself because you are hearing it.